Good morning. I'd like to call the Puget Sound Regional Council Executive Board into session. It is July 26th. Welcome everyone, and those of you here in the room, thank you for being here. And we have an extensive list of folks that are on the phone. But just a reminder, roll call is by sign-in sheet. And I'm going to read the names of the people that we believe are on the line. And if you could just acknowledge that you're there, we'll get you counted in. Mayor Dennis Law.
I'm here, thank you.
Mayor Nancy Backus.
I am here as well, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Charlotte Garrido.
I'm here too.
Major Rob Patenso.
I'm here.
Councilmember Stephanie Wright.
Good morning.
Good morning. Mayor Barbara Tolbert.
I'm here, good morning.
Excellent. Commissioner Glenn Bachman.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Courtney Gregoire. Commissioner Courtney Gregoire. Okay. Commissioner Dick Marzano.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Councilmember Terry Ryan. Terry, you there? I know you were there earlier. Okay.
He's listening and he has to be on.
Okay. Councilmember Chris Roberts.
I'm here.
And Mayor Amy Okerlander.
I'm here.
Okay, did I miss anybody on the phone?
Councilman Rick Talbert, who was talking in the background.
Okay. All right, anybody else? Okay, for the benefit of those that are on the phone or watching online, we will go around the room and introduce ourselves. I'm Dave Summers, Snohomish County Executive and President of the Board.
Bruce Dameyer, Pierce County Executive Vice President of the Board.
Sheila Rogers, PSRC staff.
Diana Lauterbach, PSRC staff.
Morning, Greg Wheeler, Mayor, City of Bremerton.
Christy Melchow, Mayor of Sammamish.
Jim Farrell, Mayor of Federal Way.
John Shelmanack, Mayor of Bellevue.
Bruce Bassett, Mercer Island City Council member representing Sound Cities Association.
Becky Erickson, Mayor, City of Paulsbo.
Josh Brown, PSRC Executive Director.
All the way over here, Rob Johnson, City of Seattle, TPP Chair.
Mike Todd, Councilmember City of Mill Creek, representing Snohomish County Cities.
Patty Rebstello, Assistant Secretary, WashDOT.
Great. And we do have a quorum. So we'll move on to communications and public comment. And I have two sign-up sheets here. Each member of the public wishing to give comment has 2 minutes to speak. We do have an on-screen timer so that speakers will be able to see how much time is remaining. Speakers should not use obscenities or make personal attacks, so please be mindful of that as you're giving public comment today. And I'm asking you to please address an issue before the Regional Council. And our first speaker is Alex Zimmerman. And Alex, please be respectful or...
Hi, my dirty double-A Führer, a Nazi social democratic mafia with progressive Gestapo principle, tax sucker, and...
Please. No more of that Nazi stuff. Come back next month. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Joe, sit down. Please. I'm not going to tolerate that anymore. Marguerite Richard.
Good day, everyone. The Lord is my light and my salvation, and of whom shall I fear? And of whom shall I be afraid? I'm just not. And I have a vision just like you have here. You say you're at work dealing with housing and expressing the interest of things being affordable. And so Mr. Johnson's committee addresses people that have things to do with inspections. So I was at a resident action council meeting with Green Lake Plaza, and they're having a lot of problems in their building, and it's a Seattle Housing Authority building. They had to get Jesse the other day. There was a situation with their elevators at Blakely, I think, Place or Manor. They were in their 80s and their 90s, and they were crying because they had totally ignored them from having problems. So if you're not comfortable in your housing place when you're supposed to have enjoyment of it, then that's a problem. And so for years, I brought issues. I've known all the way up in the Justice Department because I had to bring a lawsuit against Seattle Housing Authority because they didn't have smoke-free housing. July the 30th, HUD will make it countrywide. Every public housing will no longer have smoking tolerated in their units. But they're very vicious people, they're very cruel, and they're known to retaliate against anybody that goes up against them. So here we have a change agent. You're looking at one.
Thank you. Joe Kunstler.
Good morning, Puget Sound Regional Council. Joe Kunstler here. I'm just an American citizen. That's why I wrote representing Americans. A few scatter thoughts, if you will. The first and foremost is I generally support the Puget Sound Regional Council's mission as I see it, and I could be wrong, adhere mainly to distribute funding and help find cures to civic crises like homelessness, environmental pollution, climate change, and Zimmermanism. So I'm going to place a very simple request, and then I'm going to yield back the balance of my time, that the Transit Operators Committee, which Cassie Franklin's own Sabina Papa serves on, no longer have public comment, which would silence me, because I would like it if we developed a policy as activists and political leaders of the Larson Corollary, where all the political stuff is directed at the political people and not our wonderful transit agency staff, whether it's Cassie Sabina Papa or Executive Summers Sound Transit, too many staffers to name, or the many staffers of Pierce Transit. And hopefully I'll be able to thank Executive Summers for his great work on the future of flight. I want to yield back the balance of my time, and hopefully we can stop these outbursts from Alex Zimmerman towards the Transit Operators Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Paul Locke.
I'm Paul W. Locke. I was listening to the news, and they said that you're building a system with cars that don't even fit the tracks. I understand you purchased rail cars that won't fit the tracks. The system you should be building is an elevator system that doesn't need operators, like they did in Japan, to serve the 25 million people that use the system, because they couldn't afford the operators. So they made it like an elevator with no operators. And that way they were able to afford it. You cannot afford what you're trying to build here. You might talk the public in to give you enough money, or you can mortgage something to get the money to build the system. But where is the money going to come for to operate it? Thank you.
wrong button. That's a good one, though. All right. Thank you, Mr. Locke. So we'll move on. Just a couple of words. We have a pretty full agenda today. We've got 2 items of new business. One is finalizing what transportation projects we plan to fund in the next 3 years, and a potential study of the region's airport needs. So that's an high overview of our action items, and I'll just turn it over to Josh for the President's report.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Executive Summers. Thank you for all of our board members here in person. Thanks for being on the phone. The weather's gorgeous outside. You're here doing important regional work. As Executive Summers highlighted, 2 of those action items that we're bringing before you today, one of your important roles as serving as the Executive Board for the Region's MPO is approving project funding. So today we bring forward our project selection recommendations. Over 250 projects competed for $524 million of available funds. And they're excellent projects from throughout the region. So we're going to highlight all the incredible work that's taken place from your staff, our team here at PSRC, helping to usher the region through this competitive process and highlight some of the really remarkable projects. I also want to recognize one of our federal partner sets here. Ned Conroy is a community planner with the Federal Transit Administration. Ned, I want to thank you for coming over and joining us today at our executive board meeting. We work really closely with the FTA and federal highways on a whole slew of issues to make sure that we're implementing federal policy appropriately in our region. And Ned is just an incredible partner. So thanks for making time to come down here and see our executive board at work. The other item that we're bringing before you this morning is our Regional Aviation Baseline Study, and I don't want to steal any of Ben Bekenta's comments, but that's something that we've briefed this executive board on earlier in the year. We've been working with our federal partners at the FAA to secure that grant, and now we've reached a point to be able to move forward with authorization of and contract authority for that project. I continue to be out and about, meeting with our members. I know he's on the phone, Mayor Patanzu from the city of Port Orchard. Rob, thanks a lot for taking me around town and just showing me some fantastic things happening in your community. I also had a nice opportunity to meet with the Snohomish County cities a couple weeks ago. So Mike Todd, you were there. In fact, City of Snohomish, Marysville, Arlington, Lake Stevens, Stanwood, Monroe, Woodway, practically all of Snohomish County was there. It was a great get-together, and I want to thank Mayor Smith for the invitation, and of course, Mayor Dave Earling. We were in Edmond, so I have to say it was 82 degrees and sunny. That's what Dave Earling always says is the weather in Edmonds, right? So it was about 82 and sunny, maybe a little overcast that day. On your consent agenda is accepting some donations for our commercial space sector study. So the Economic Development District Board had identified commissioning a commercial space study as one of their action items to implement the regional economic strategy. We have some of the leading companies in the world in our region doing work: Blue Origin, SpaceX, Boeing, Space Flight Industries, Aerojet Rocketdyne, Stratolaunch. So this is the first time we've done an analysis of what this sector means to our region. We talk a lot about aerospace, but the space part of aerospace is a growth opportunity we wanted to understand a little better. Our report tells us that there's 6,200 jobs in our region that are related to the sector and an estimated $1.76 billion in economic activity. So this report is being finalized at our September Executive Board meeting. We'll bring back a presentation to brief the Executive Board on the findings from that report. And I wanted to specifically thank the jurisdictions that helped to fund this effort. Blue Origin contributed to this study, Snohomish County, the City of Everett, the cities of Federal Way, Kent, Redmond, Seattle, the Port of Bremerton, and the Suquamish Tribe. So thank you for all your contributions to this effort, and we look forward to bringing back that report at our September board meeting. Also on the consent agenda is an adjustment to our FTA, our Federal Transit Administration funds, to align our estimates to the final federal allocations. The good news is there's nearly $39 million of additional funding that's being made available to our region. Of course, we go through this process of our adjustments to make sure that we're in line with the actual total is. We try to be conservative. So $39 million more funding. One of the handouts that all of you have here are some public comments. So there are 3 projects in our FTA adjustments that are new to our process. So we didn't receive public comments on those projects initially. 2 are Skagit transit projects supporting commuter service into our region. So many of you are aware, if Skagit Transit or Intercity Transit are providing service into our region for commuters, we help to provide funding for those projects. So those are included, as well as Kitsap Transit's passenger-only ferry terminal improvements. So in total, we received 4 comments. All are supportive of those projects. Mayor Patanzu, I know you had a letter from the City of Port Orchard. Thank you for that. And I just wanted you to be aware. And then finally, from the Growth Board, you'll see on the consent agenda, certification of University Place's Regional Growth Center sub-area plan and full certification for the City of Edenville's comprehensive plan. So with that, thanks for all your time this morning, and I'm happy to take any questions from the Executive Board.
Any questions?
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Josh. All right, we will go on to committee reports, and please refer to your agenda packets for the reports on the policy board meetings. And Operations Committee met this morning, and I'd like to call on Executive Bruce Dameyer, Chair of the committee, to give us a report.
Thank you, Mr. President. We did meet this morning. We took action on 4 items that we're forwarding to the Executive Board for approval. 3 are on the consent agenda. Item 6B, approval of the vouchers. Item 6C, approval of the budget amendment for the donations, which Josh just spoke to. And item 6D, approval of a successor trustee for our deferred compensation plan. We also recommend approval of item 8A, which will be for full action, which is the approval of the budget amendment and contract authority related to the Regional Aviation Baseline Study. We also reviewed briefly our monthly standard reports on budgets, grants, and contracts, and that concludes my report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Any questions, Bruce? Any questions? All right, we will move on to the consent agenda. Would anyone like anything removed for discussion?
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Motion to approve and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, consent agenda is adopted. New business. This is in regards to approval of projects proposed for PSRC's 2021 to 2022 Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration funds, and I'll call on Kelly McGurty to give a report.
Good morning. Thank you. So I'm going to provide just a few slides just to give an overview. I know there are some new folks in the room, and then I'm going to spend the majority of time highlighting a few key projects. So you may remember, as we do prior to every project selection process, we ask for volunteers from our 4 boards to serve on a project selection task force. And this cycle, we had about 30 volunteers from those boards participate for 4 months, starting in the fall of 2017. And their work resulted in a policy framework document, which was adopted by this board in February of this year. And the policy framework is really our guidance for how we conduct the process. It's very detailed. The task force spent a lot of time talking about the different policies and procedures. It's based on Vision 2040 policies, and it really guides how we conduct the process. So as soon as the framework was adopted in February, we immediately released our call for projects, and all of, as Josh mentioned, all of your staff as well as ours has been hard at work walking through the competitions and coming up with the project recommendations that are in your packet and for which we're asking for your approval today. A little bit of background on when we talk about PSRC's federal funds. We do receive about $260 million on an annual basis in federal transportation dollars. You can see the split. We receive both Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration dollars. The one note I would make is these 2 programs, they come to the state of Washington in different pathways. So the majority of our highway funds is managed by the WashDOT, and then we have relatively more modest amounts that we manage, which we talk about today. The Federal Transit Administration funds flow differently. There's more of that direct connection to the regions and to the transit agencies directly. So you'll see that's why when we talk about PSRC funds, and you'll see the charts in a moment, we do manage more of our transit dollars than the highway dollars. As Josh mentioned earlier, we had received 254 projects requesting a total of $867 million, and we have 530 roughly to award. We had program in advance. We award these dollars in advance, so the funds that we're talking about today are federal fiscal year 2021 and 2022 dollars. There is a massive amount of detail behind all of this, which I'm not going to go into because I could take up a full month of your time. But the culmination of all the project recommendations that are in your packet, there are a total of 124 out of the 254 that were submitted that are being recommended for the available funds. And this is just a little bit of an overview of the flavor of these types of projects. Over 80% of the recommended projects are construction and implementation phases. I think that's a higher percentage than we've seen before. The chart in front of you is a little bit of a blunt instrument in terms of describing the projects, and I'll just make a few comments here. The blue bars is representative of the amount of funding in total, and this is both our highway and our transit dollars, so that does change the flavor of this chart. The blue bar is amount of funding, the orange bar is number of projects. A few comments, the equipment bar is really primarily the replacement and purchase of buses. The transit capital is reflective of quite a number of investments in expanding our transit through light rail, bus rapid transit, park and rides, and other investments. Preservation is both roadway preservation as well as transit facility and infrastructure preservation. The multimodal category is a little bit of a catch-all because we've learned over the years that there's not a roadway project, there's not a transit project. They really are multimodal in nature, and many of the projects are doing quite a lot of things. So, for example, a project providing roadway improvements most often also provides sidewalks, bicycle lanes, signal improvements, things of that nature. So this is just kind of our high-level look at the overall project types. And with that, what I'd like to do is actually walk through, these are just a handful of our recommended projects, but it'll give you a flavor for what is in your packet. The first one that I'd like to highlight is the WashDOT project, the Port of Tacoma State Route 509 spur. This is part of the Puget Sound Gateway program. It's recommended for $4 million for construction from the Regional Highway competition. The project includes a new 4-lane limited access connection from Interstate 5 to the Port of Tacoma Manufacturing Industrial Center at State Route 509. It also includes some restoration of Hylebos Creek and as well as a connection to the Interurban Trail in Fife. The City of Poulsbo is recommended for $1.35 million for construction of the State Route 305 pedestrian tunnel. This is through their countywide competition. This project constructs a shared-use tunnel under State Route 305 at a congested intersection connecting to 4 other trails. The City of Federal Way is recommended for $170,000 of design through the countywide competition for the Phase 3 of their adaptive traffic control system. And this project will upgrade communications and install cameras to support an adaptive traffic control system for 13 intersections. The City of Mount Lake Terrace is recommended for $2 million of construction from the Snohomish Countywide competition for their Main Street revitalization project. This project will improve 2 roadways within the city's town center. It includes reconstruction of the roadways, sidewalks and bicycle lanes, ADA curb ramps, lighting, signal upgrades. So an example of that multimodal nature of the type of projects that we see. This slide represents a number of regional bus rapid transit projects that are being recommended today from both of the regional competitions, the regional highway and the regional transit competition, as well as several of the countywide competitions, for a combined total of $42.6 million from those competitions. King County Metro's Rapid Ride is recommended for 2 components, the Totem Lake Bellevue Eastgate line and the Renton Newcastle Eastgate Overlake line. Pierce Transit is recommended for their Pacific Avenue State Route 7 corridor BRT. Community Transit Swift Orange Line expansion. Sound Transit's I-405 Bus Rapid Transit Express from both Linwood to Bellevue as well as from Bellevue to Burien. And 2 rapid ride lines in the city of Seattle along the Madison and the Rainier corridors. The Washington State Ferries is recommended for $6.5 million for construction from our regional highway competition. This project will convert 2 of the Jumbo Mark II vessels on the Seattle to Bainbridge Island route from diesel to hybrid electric propulsion. This project will produce significant savings in fuel consumption and costs and also provide significant emission reductions. The city of Sumner is recommended for a combined $4.7 million of construction from both the regional and the Pierce Countyway competitions for their State Route 410 bottleneck improvements project. This project eliminates the final bottleneck on this designated freight route. It'll reconfigure 2 intersections of this congested highway, fixing the gap of the 5-lane section and the 2-lane bridge. It'll also provide a shared use path on a new parallel bridge connecting to the Sumner Sounder Station, the Sumner Pacific Manufacturing Industrial Center, and several trails in the region. Pardon me. The city of Linwood is recommended for a combined $4.76 million of construction, also from the regional and countywide competitions, for their State Route 524 widening. This project improves State Route 524, which is also 196th Street Southwest in Linwood, with business access transit lanes, a center turn lane, sidewalks, lighting, signals, and a pavement overlay. And this is part of Linwood's overall city center project to address growth and to support the future Sound Transit light rail and Swift BRT service. The city of Pacific is recommended for just under $1 million from the King Countywide competition for the Milwaukee Boulevard Improvements Project. This project will provide roadway repairs and resurfacing, completing gaps in the sidewalk system, and updating curb ramps on this facility that leads to their city center. The city of Bremerton is recommended for just under $4.2 million in design and construction from both the regional and countywide competition for Washington and 11th Street improvements. This project will provide a roundabout at the intersection of Washington Avenue and the Minette Bridge, reconstruct Washington and 11th Street, including sidewalks and bike lanes. And this is a key facility that has traffic affected by the ferry, as well as Naval Base Kitsap, Bremerton. Pierce County is recommended for $790,000 through the Pierce Countyway competition for their countywide transportation demand management program. This is an expansion of their current programs, building on success with efforts such as the JBLM strategic plan. It will continue efforts such as ride sharing and outreach, and also provide outreach and education along the State Route 7 corridor for TDM activities, which is planned for bus rapid transit service. That was my last very quick highlight. Again, 124 projects are included in your packet. Today, we're asking for action on those project recommendations. I would also remind you that in addition to the projects recommended for funding, we also have prioritized lists of contingency projects so that we are ready to go with priority projects should additional funds become available prior to the next cycle. So we're asking for action today. Once we receive that, we will go off and build our new Regional Transportation Improvement Program, which will take us out to the year 2022. We'll release that for public comment in September and come back to you in October for full approval. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions on the process or projects, and this is the action that we're requesting today.
Thank you. Questions? Rob?
Not a question as much as just a reminder. So we all have our regional process, which our collective good friend Deb Nelson was kind enough to chair for us for several months last year. That resulted in a set of recommendations coming out of those regional processes that Kelly talked about. You also all went through your own countywide processes. This rolls it all up. So a lot of folks have had a lot of eyes on this, both from the technical side and the political side, and I'm happy to ask for the board to approve the action in front of us today.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Yes.
So we're City of Bremerton is grateful for the consideration, and we fully support these proposed recommendations. So and thank you. This project means a lot to our downtown.
Further comments? No? Any further comments? All right. And I also thank the staff for great work on this and everybody that worked so hard. It's a major piece of business. So with that, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. That motion passes, and we'll move on to
Executive Summers?
Yes.
I just want to give a special shout out to Kelly because she's gone above and beyond. She makes this look easy. going through project selection and management of our TIP and all the things that we do on top of adopting a transportation plan. So Kelly, just thanks for going beyond the call of duty. Great work.
Excellent work. Thank you. All right. Next item is approval of budget amendment and contract authority for consultant services for a Regional Aviation Baseline Study. And we'll call on Ben Bakenta.
Thank you, President Summers, and thank you, Executive Board members. Good morning. This is agenda item number 8, and there is a memo describing the actions. There are two. And we have a dog joining us as well.
I'll take that as
this
an
morning. Okay. Is that the, anyway. So page 52 of your packet, there's a memo describing this action. And this is a follow-up sort of technical amendment really to the direction that you gave us as staff back in February. There was a discussion of whether PSRC should work with the Federal Aviation Administration to pursue a discretionary grant to conduct a regional aviation baseline study, and you gave us that direction. And so since that time, we've been working with FAA to line up with their discretionary granting program. And that has entailed both working on a more detailed work plan and the scope of work to be included in the grant, as well as conducting a request for qualifications process to select a consultant that would actually do the work. And so the process is nearly complete. We hope to hear any day from the FAA that detailed scope of work with all the technical specifications is approved so that we can submit the grant. They anticipate issuing the grant in early August, and since you all don't meet in August, we're coming for authority and the budget amendment prior to that being complete. They have some difficulty in issuing grants in September with the end of the federal fiscal year, so August is their preferred timeline. So we are here to ask you today to take two actions. The first is to amend the adopted supplemental budget and work program for fiscal years 18 and 19 to add an additional $935,000 in anticipated funds from the FAA. And a note there, our current adopted budget and work program assumes already $315,000 in anticipated funds. And we do that because we look back at our previous biennial budgets, and typically that's about the amount that we've received in the past in grants from the FAA. And so this action adds $935,000 to that anticipated amount prior to us actually receiving a grant. The second action is to authorize the executive director to enter into one or more consultant contracts to prepare that study in an amount not to exceed $1.25 million. I should note as well that the entire grant amount wouldn't be contracted out to a consultant. There would be still some revenues for PSRC to administer the grant, but we wanted to make sure that we had enough contract authority there so that when we finalize the grant and understand what the final contract is, we don't have to come back for more authority there. So that really is the long and the short of it. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions? Jim?
Well, first of all, thank you, Josh and your team, for the inclusion of the language previously when we were here in February to include the capacity language with regard to the budget and aviation issues within the central Puget Sound area, and also the impact area community. So I see that in the scoping document. I just had one question, and that is, and I think those two things were very important, and I think speak to where we're at. But with regard to, if you take a look at the second page of the scoping document, the second to the last bullet, it appears that there's some softening of the language, and I want to make sure that we don't get into a situation in which we are softening the language, in which we're diluting the real purpose of this. And if you take a look at the current language of the second to last bullet, it says outline potential scenarios that could emerge based on the study's findings. Now that's a material where just somewhat differentiation from or departure from the language that was provided back in February, which read, provide options for addressing the central Puget Sound region's future aviation needs. So can you explain the difference and kind of where we're headed with this?
I think happy to, and that's a good observation. I think the intention was to really signal that this study wouldn't result in specific options that would be acted upon, but rather would produce scenarios for consideration. And so there is a slight semantic difference there, but there was some confusion as we went around this spring with folks who were interpreting some of those words that this would be a siting study and would be have very specific options or recommendations, when in fact the purpose of this study is to lay out the facts, to identify potential scenarios, ways that issues that we see in capacity or needs in the future, how they might be addressed. And so it was really to signal that this isn't a siting study, but rather is to identify those potential scenarios that we'd have to address.
Thank you. And I do think it is important to make sure that we establish expectations, and we don't set expectations too high, and then obviously, the general public comes in with a certain degree of expectation that we would do exactly that. But I do think that as a Puget Sound Regional Council and as a region, I think in light of the small footprint of the airport, I do think that we need to be thinking that there is an eventual capacity. There is a fill line with which, if you keep going from that point, you're going to materially affect the quality of life for people that are the airport affected communities.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for your work on this.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Anybody on the phone? Okay. So, no questions? All right. First action, ask for motion to amend the adopted supplemental budget and work program for fiscal years 2018 to 2019.
So moved.
Okay. All right. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that motion passes. And the second action was to authorize the executive director to enter into one or more consultant contracts.
So moved.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that motion also passes. Good work, and this will be an interesting process in the coming months. Thank you. All right. Okay, we're going to move on to our discussion items, and the first is in regards to Puget Sound data trends, and Craig Hellman will give the report.
Maybe I'll just give a brief introduction. So I think many of you, we have a lot of veteran elected officials here this morning. You all know Craig Hellman, our senior program manager, lead for our data team. So every few months we try to bring to the executive board different data trends and updates. You may have noticed that there was some fresh population data for our cities and counties that have been released, the OFM numbers, just a couple weeks ago. So that, along with some other trends, we wanted to give an update to the executive board on some of the things that we're spotting in the region. So without further ado, Craig.
Thanks, Josh. Good morning. So yeah, we always find July a nice time because we can start with kind of the population trends and then weave in all the other kind of stuff that we pull together here at the Regional Council for folks to look at. So last year, we've been talking about historic growth happening in the region, and we've all been wondering if things were going to start to moderate or not. Last couple of years, we'd added over 80,000 people to the region. This past year, we added about 68,000 people. If you look at that over a 4-year period, we've added almost 300,000 people to our region. Pretty rapid historic growth. We've talked about this before, that basically this has happened only a couple of times since 1960. And what's interesting about population trends is the same thing has kind of happened. We kind of have a couple years of a really, really high peak, and we kind of have the shoulders on the sides where it's a bit more moderating. I'd still say 68,000 people to the region in 1 year is still actually pretty historic. So what we wanted to do, and we're going to go through some tables with lots of numbers. You can look at these afterwards. I'll just highlight a few things. We start with the region, and then actually I wanted to look at some county-specific stuff. So the first one to orient you to these tables on the left side, these are the 10 fastest growing cities. On the left is total number, so the total change in population. And in general, you're going to see the larger cities pop up there. It's natural the bigger cities add a bit more people. But on the right side, we wanted to look at what were the same top 10 cities, but based on the percent change that's occurred. So when you look at the region, one thing that really pops out to me, that when you look at these 10 cities, 9 of these 10 cities actually have a regional growth center in them. City of Seattle is up to over 730,000 people in the city itself. Give some context, that's about the 18th largest city population in the country. It's grown quite rapidly. You're approaching 750,000 people, and if you look there, then you can quickly see all the others. In context, last year, City of Seattle added about 27,000 people to the city. And then you can look and kind of see what's interesting when you look at those places in percent change. Places like Gig Harbor, as an example, pop up there as the second fastest growing city in the entire region based on that population growth. And you can see if you look from left to right, the one that pops up to me is the city of Linwood. You have the city of Linwood in the top 10 in terms of just raw number, but also in the top 10 just in terms of the share of growth as well. And there's Paulsville right at the bottom, the top 10 in terms of the rate of change. Now I flipped this, I always do things alphabetically when I look county by county, and so we always end up leading with King County. So I decided to flip this, and so it's going reverse alphabetical order. So we'll look at Snohomish County first.
I thought you were going to say north to south. But,
Yeah, no, it's purely, I had to do something alphabetically. I don't want to play favorites. My wife works at community transit, so I have to be careful to clarify that I'm not doing anything favors here. When you look at this, if you think about the Snohomish County, you see those places that are growing the fastest. You see actually the city of Everett right at the top, followed by Linwood and Marysville. And when you look at those rates of change, I really find the rates of change can be really, really interesting. Sometimes you'll see on a couple of these where they're really small cities that might be a little misleading, but it really gives you a context for how rapidly things are changing. But you see those largest cities popping up there. Bothell is an example in King and Snohomish County, so you actually see it actually has the totals for both counties. It didn't split it up by the two. In terms of Pierce County, and that's why I bring that up, because the city of Auburn is actually at the top of this list because it's in King and Pierce counties. If you were to take that out, you can actually see the city of Tacoma actually added the most people in Pierce County. In terms of that rate of change, and we've seen this, especially with Gig Harbor, it's added quite a few people, but is also growing at a fairly rapid rate of change of almost 8% change in a single year. Context, about regional average was about 1.6%. Okay. Kitsap County, I can't quite put 10 cities on Kitsap, so these are just the 4 cities there. But I would highlight the same kind of thing. You see the largest growth happening in the city of Bremerton, but Paulsville itself, you can see that growing at basically twice the rate of the kind of average in the region right now. Okay. And the last top 10 cities in King County, and the one I'd point out here, Josh had mentioned it, but I actually like Skykomish there. Skykomish, this has added 5 people last year and is about middle of the pack in terms of its rate of change. So that's the thing to keep in context when you're a very small city.
One family.
I think that one large family moved into the area, you get it. And you can see it's in some ways you see some of those largest growths by the cities in King County. We're obviously on that list of the regional change as well.
Yeah.
So.
Something I'd add, so when I'm out giving data presentations, one of the things I share is back in 1960, the city of Seattle had a population of about 550,000. And our entire region was about 1.5 million. So the city of Seattle was about a third of the population. 30 years later, in 1990, our region's population nearly doubled to about 2.9 million, and the city of Seattle lost 10% of its population. So since that time, our region continues to grow. Seattle's population has increased by about 40%. So when we look at the metropolitan cities and Craig's comment about our largest cities growing, that was something that didn't take place for a long time, but we're seeing that. And this is oftentimes infill development around transit areas. It's not just annexations or greenfield development. Oftentimes, a lot of the robust growth in places like Auburn or in Linwood, it's that infill development that's beginning to take place. So it's something new.
Definitely. So one of the things we've found interesting, we've been tracking as you think about, so this is showing that same population line, but now added in the teal is the number of housing units that have been added to the region. And you can see we continue to increase the number of housing units coming online. We're about back to where we were in terms of our highest points in the early 2000s in terms of housing units. I put a statistic there on the right that in 2018 there were 2.8 new people for every housing unit added. Give you a context, the average number of people in a household in our region is a little over 2.5. So if you kind of think about that, we're actually still lagging a bit behind in terms of housing production compared to the population change.
And something to always point out with this is when the economy gets hot, it's easier for folks to pick up, move into our region. There's always that lag in the development community. You think about the market for building housing, whether it's single family, townhouses, apartments, you got to acquire the property, you got to get the permits, got to build it. So we always have that delay between where the building community's at to where the market and the demand is. And I think we're all living with that today with affordability in the region being where it's at.
Exactly. We are still a magnet for newcomers. A large chunk of the change in population is actually people coming here for work. And the gray line that kind of hovers down there, somewhere between 20 and 25,000 people is what we call the natural change. Number of births minus the number of deaths, and you hit it, and that's basically when you see those times when the economy is growing versus the times when the economy is shrinking. That's when that teal line shifts around there. And so you can see about how many people, and since 2010, almost 60% of our population change has been based on people moving to the region. And I ask this question every time and it never changes, but I'm just curious, most people wonder, where do most people come to when they move into the region? A lot of people think it's California. That's actually number 2. Number 1 continues to be other places in the state of Washington is usually number 1, followed by California, and followed by in the top 5 is usually actually from another country in our region, especially with the large tech boom. But so whenever we want to blame Californians for all of our problems, we should start with our fellow Washingtonians.
I'm not sure if we want to do that, but good point, Chris. Yes.
I'm just sensitive. When I moved here in 1989 from Southern California, I was the reason that everything was going wrong in this region. So
it's payback, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So one of the reasons that kind of fit with that migration, one of the reasons why we're seeing this population change is a continued robust regional economy. This is April to April. We actually have newer employment data. It's showing a very similar trend, but I wanted to connect the employment data with the population data with April 1st. So over the last year, we added about 54,000 jobs to the region. Since 2010, coming out of the Great Recession, we've added over 380,000 jobs. I mentioned the population growth was about 1.6%. The employment growth, as I have on there, is over 2.6%. So the employment continues to outpace the population growth. And I wanted to give some context in terms of the region's economy, our number of jobs compared to the state's jobs. So it's the same bar chart with the orange added. That's the number of jobs that were added everywhere else in Washington over the last year. We make up about 65% of the state's employment, and last year we accounted for about 64% of the state's growth. What happens in our region really drives what happens in the state. Okay. An interesting one, and we've seen it happening. We like to look at SeaTac airport trends for a variety of reasons. One of them being it's kind of an indicator of economic activity. As we've looked at airport passenger volume growth, it's been quite historic over the last 5 years. And as like everything, growth begins to moderate, but we continue to see the largest growth. So over the, that should have said 2017 at the bottom. I'm surprised I missed that one. So between 2016 and 17, we added about 3% more passengers through SeaTac Airport. The point I'd make is if you look at monthly volumes, we're pretty consistently now, every month when you see a new number of people passing through the airport, it's a new record. And so it's one of those things that you continue, if you're at the airport, you see how busy it is. Limiting slides, I didn't put it in here, but what's also very interesting is if you look at the air cargo coming through SeaTac Airport, it's actually growing even faster than the passenger volumes. Port of Seattle has a lot of great data on their website. We pull it from there if folks are interested. There's links down here you can kind of see, but I can share that with folks, but they have a lot of really interesting information. But the air cargo, especially over the last 3 years, has been growing quite rapidly at SeaTac Airport.
So just going back to that, so the context of our Regional Aviation Baseline Study that you just authorized us to move forward with, all of our airports in the region are in various phases of master planning. They're looking out to the mid-2030s in terms of demand and needs for the region. Since we're beginning to extend our planning horizon out to 2050, as we bring back and do this work over the next year and a half on this Regional Aviation Baseline Study, we'll have a range of passenger or cargo manufacturing needs out to that 2050 number most likely. and it'll be a range to get around, to be able to get prepared for. So when we look at the 47 million in 2017, we'll have some type of 2050 number to get us organized and focus on and get prepared for.
Okay. And so, since we show all these, I'm always trying for different things. So I'm curious how it clicks. And so we've talked a lot about how the population's been changing and growing here. And folks who have heard the presentations before, our region's transit ridership is growing faster than any other place in the nation. And it continued again for this last year. So this first one I put in here was just to give you some context. Since 2010, transit boardings have grown 20%. Our population has grown about 12%. So we are growing 1.6 times faster than the population growth. So if the question is it just, do we have more people on buses because there's just more people here? Well, that's one part of it, but we actually have quite a bit more than that going on.
Yeah, and Craig and Councilmember Johnson, Mayor Erickson, our transportation plan that you just adopted on May 31st, one of the things that we forecast out to 2040 is what does transit ridership look like? Essentially, this pace of growth that we've experienced since 2010, we're projecting that with all the transit investments that we're going to be bringing online in the next 20 plus years, that this trend will continue. And as we're building out light rail, as the buses that are being replaced by our light rail corridors then provide better connections through neighborhoods and to that transit spine, that we'll be able to keep this pace of transit ridership growth up, and that more people will have better access to jobs and housing in the region.
And so this one, it might be a little hard to read it, but we'll see how well it works. But it's actually showing the share of boardings by mode. And the inner circle was what that share of boardings was in 2014, and the outer circle is what it is in 2018. So the easiest one to see is the green in there. In 2014, over 80%, so that's actually 82% of boardings in our region were on buses, and about 6% were in light rail. Just in that 4-year time period, it is now about 12% of the boardings are in light rail, and 75% of the boardings are in buses. You can kind of see that shift. And what you don't see on there is commuter rail is actually at 2%. Doesn't sound like a lot, but that is actually moving quite a bit when you consider the amount of service that's provided. But still, by and far, bus is the single largest mover of people by transit in our region. And we put this up, there's a lot of stuff on here for folks to see. This is the ridership by operator. This is through the end of May of this year, comparing through the end of May for all those other years back to 2014. So scale-wise, one note to make, King County Metro through these months through the end of May has moved almost 52 million people, or boardings I should say, on transit, whereas you can see a lot of the other ones are about 4 or 5 million. So these aren't, if I put them all to the scale to fit Metro, the other ones are quite small, just to give you a highlight. One of the things I'd really like to point out is actually Pierce Transit. Pierce Transit's ridership had been shrinking for several straight years after some restructuring and the shrinking of the boundary and other things. And we've actually seen in this year actually growth happening in Pierce Transit. And you can kind of see through all the others, we're basically fairly flat in Kitsap and Everett. One note you always have to make with Everett Transit is the Swift line that Community Transit operates actually serves the city of Everett, and the ridership on Swift is reported for Community Transit. So in some ways, I like to usually combine them to show that. But so if you actually add Swift back into Everett Transit, you actually don't see that drop there. So I'd say in general, and you can see the growth in Sound Transit. So these are all modes. So the largest growth that's happening in Sound Transit, a big chunk of that is from the light rail. You especially saw it with the additions made in 2017. And with that, I'd also point out that ferry ridership continues to increase. And the reason I bring this one up and showing it may not look dramatic, but we're actually at, and for the longest time, the early 2000 up to about 2010, ferry ridership was declining in the region. We've actually been increasing since about 2013, and we're now above those highs that had occurred in the early 2000s. And so we've actually rebounded from that and continue to grow. And I believe this is my last slide. This was a question we've gotten before. People have wondered about how efficient is transit ridership in our region. So one of the ways to look at it is ridership per person or per capita transit usage. And so this is a little scatter plot showing the 52 largest metro areas in the country. And we labeled some of the ones to pop out. And so this is in terms of how many boardings per person. So in the central Puget Sound region, we average about 55 boardings per person. And the reason we point out in this one is the only places that move more people in transit compared to our region are those that have had legacy systems. So you see San Francisco, Boston, DC, Philadelphia, and Chicago are the only ones that exceed us. You can look at places like Portland. I always like to point out Portland is actually behind the central Puget Sound region when it comes to moving people in transit. And so you can see where others like Denver and Minneapolis with similar size MPOs where they're at in relation to us. Minneapolis moves about half as many people per person. Okay. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Greg. Questions? And this presentation is online at the meeting site, so
yes, it is.
If people would like to look at the data, it is there for you. Any other questions?
Just a question,
Yes,
is the
Mayor.
granular level of the data available online, or is that something I can get from you? Kind of, as you were talking about community transit and Everett Transit combined, especially as how they serve Everett, that's just data that would be very helpful to see, specific for our region.
Yeah, definitely. Just contact me, and I'd be happy to give any of the data for you. What's online right now is just the roll-ups of the slides, but all the very detailed data that goes into it, I'm happy to provide.
Great,
Yeah,
thank you.
and anytime, oftentimes you all, this will kind of, later today or tomorrow, you might have some questions about some follow-up on data. Just follow up with Craig or follow up with me, and we'll see what we can get to for you.
Mike?
Just want to make a pitch at the opportunity. I think Craig he's more full of it than he even expressed today. He's got so much information. If you just ask the questions, full of data, full of data.
Full of what?
Data.
Be clear about that, Councilman.
I think that this is something that we come to these presentations, we go, this is cool, and we're all taking notes. And shame on me for not sharing that with all the cities I represent in terms of elected officials, but shame on all of us, too, for not getting it back to our staff, because I think our staff could use this data for lots of stuff we do. And I think the data is there in the region, and we all own it because we all paid for it, but I don't think we take enough use of this. And so I'd love to see us just totally swamp Craig with requests for good data, like Kathy just asked about. It sparked an interest, but if we don't follow up and have our staff know that this data is down here, it's just in Craig's brain and his computers, and I think there's a lot more that could be done with the information that's here, because this is great stuff. So thanks for doing that, and I would love us all to just fill your inbox with requests. Thanks.
One of the things we try to do in my weekly emails, you'll see links to different data trends. We blog about it. We try to sometimes we have a hard copy that we bring to our board meetings, but we need your help to get this information out. And the reason why we're providing a report like this to the executive board, or a lot of the other ways that we're trying to get our data and information out, is we want the region to be informed about the trends that are happening, so that you as decision makers, you know what's happening, you're aware, oftentimes you're experiencing it firsthand, but the data backs up what we're all living through.
Great. Any other comments or questions? All right, good job, Craig. Thank you. Yeah, very interesting. Okay, then we'll move on to Regional Open Space Conservation Plan, and Erica Harris and Maria Sandercutt.
Good morning. We're excited to talk to you about the Regional Open Space Conservation Plan and have a discussion with you. My name is Erica Harris. I'm a senior planner in the Growth Management Group. And this is Maria Sanderco. She worked on the plan as a planner and GIS analyst, and is now a shoreline planner at the Department of Ecology now that the open space plan is done. So you might remember about 2 years ago, we actually came to you and you took an action to approve the grant that we got from the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities to work on the plan and to put in our work plan and budget. So we've been working since then with the Growth Management Policy Board to develop the plan. Oops. All right, and some of you may remember the the open space policies that were adopted in Vision 2040. This is one of them on the top. Vision 2040 recognized the importance of open space and as the foundation of our economy and quality of life. Studies since then have only confirmed that. And then the action below is an action to work on a open space plan or green space plan. We weren't able to do that right away, but luckily a group from the University of Washington and other partners took on that work to develop the plan, and we really had used that as a foundation, and that was called the ROS, the Regional Open Space Strategy. You may have heard of their work. And they really helped us provide the foundation. What is open space? It's working forests, farmland, aquatic systems, natural lands, urban open space, and regional trails. So we have a very broad definition, in case you're wondering. And that really did provide the foundation for why is open space important. It provides critical services, recreation, forest products, food, clean water, clean air, just a few important things that we rely on. So, and they even did an economic valuation of that. So we did receive a grant to do this work. The purpose of the plan is to accelerate conservation of open space in the region with the population growth continuing to we can plan for that, but we also need to plan for our open spaces, and Vision recognized that, and we need to continue that. We know there's a lot of good work already being done, but we want to support that and really raise that up and hopefully find funding for that and other types of support. So the plan weaves together different types of planning good planning that's been done around the region. So we have our salmon recovery plans embedded in them, as well as hazard mitigation plans, comprehensive plans, parks plans. So you can start to see some of the multiple benefits that come from planning these things together. And I want to just touch on our advisory structure that helped us work through the plan. We had our Growth Management Policy Board, our Regional Staff Committee, multi-departmental teams from all of the counties, as well as an advisory committee that we put together specifically to focus on this plan that included counties and cities, tribes, agencies, nonprofits, and forestry and farming businesses. And I'll acknowledge that we have a member on our advisory committee in the audience, Michael Murphy from King County. So folks like him did a lot of work to work through the work plan. And now I'll pass it over to Maria, who will tell you a little bit about the plan.
We mapped open space and worked on this plan from a watershed perspective, because ecological processes happen more on a watershed process across jurisdictional boundaries. And a really big component of this plan was to produce our first ever regional open space network. And this is a collection of public and private lands that are regionally important open spaces that support our quality of life. As Erica mentioned, we considered 6 categories of open space: farmland, working forests, aquatic systems, natural lands, urban open space, which is our system of parks and designated green spaces, and also regional trails. And the bubbles on the right give you a sense of how many acres we're talking about, and also the overlap of these categories. And we hope that in addition to providing a vision for the region of our open space, that this map and the database behind it can also we can share that with jurisdictions that are interested in doing open space planning, give that data to them to help support their planning decisions. The next component was to identify our conservation needs. So these are the remaining parts of our network that are under threat of development, that maybe need more conservation efforts towards them. And to do this, we focused on parts of the network that are not already in long-term protection, so either owned outright or have a conservation easement. And then it's a little different for each category. For farmland, we focus pretty much just on any farmland that's not already in long-term protection through a conservation easement, as we heard that there's the most threat is really on our farmland. For working forests, we focus that a little bit more by looking at forests that are not already designated for forestry, or that are, but that have been subdivided smaller than 20 acres. For aquatic systems and natural lands, our conservation needs focused on areas that are undeveloped and still providing intact habitat. For trails, this is a little different. We looked at not planned trails that are going to complete existing trails or connect trails, or in some cases we have some whole new trail segments. And then we were able to actually estimate the number of acres, what is left to finish the job. So for each category of open space, we were able to estimate these acres in each of our 8 watersheds that we have in the region. And this comes to, we're estimating about 463,000 acres to finish the job. And again, this is looking out to 2050 and 300 miles of regional trails. And urban open space, we approached a little bit differently. Before I talk about how we calculated our needs for this, I want to mention the analysis that led into this. We wanted to estimate how many people in the region have access to parks and urban open space, because we know having nearby access to parks is really important for mental health and physical health and also child development. So we mapped out our system of parks across our urban growth area and found that about 76% of the region, about 3/4 of people in our urban growth area, do live within walking distance of a park or designated green space. And we had kind of left it there for our draft plan, and then we heard comments from a number of reviewers that we should also think about, well, how many more parks do we need? What do we need to do to close those gaps? So for that, we looked at the places in the region within the urban growth area that don't currently have access to parks and green space, and we prioritized those looking at level of canopy cover, tree canopy cover in those gap areas, and also demographics in those gap areas, so income level, race, and English language proficiency. And the map here is showing census block groups that overlap with the gap areas. It's not the boundaries of the gaps themselves. And the red areas are the highest priority gap areas. These have low level of canopy cover and a high number of people from historically underserved communities. And these represent about 24 different areas in the region that we're considering our highest priority gap areas that would need investment in new parks and open space. We also recognize that urban open space can support our regional growth strategy by making compact urban areas attractive places for people to live. And we found that there were an additional 4 gap areas that overlap with regional growth centers. So we wanted to elevate those as priority needs as well. And similarly, we found another 19 gap areas that overlap with transit communities, which are areas where parks could support transit-oriented development. So we identified 47 total areas in the region that are, it's kind of our minimum base level of need, just to address our highest priority urban open space needs. The next part of the plan was our action plan, and this is 10 strategies to help address these conservation needs that we identified. I'm going to go through them really quickly. First is to incorporate open space conservation into all levels of planning, and our first big opportunity for that is with the vision update. But we also hope that local jurisdictions who are interested in this will take our data and incorporate it into their planning. 2, support growth in the right places to relieve development pressure on our open spaces. 3, keep working lands working through purchase and transfer of development rights and providing support to farmers and foresters. 4, protect remaining key habitat areas. 5, support urban open space and increase access to nearby nature for urban residents. 6, build a regional trail network. 7, enhance stewardship on open space lands through incentive programs and other technical assistance programs. 8, restore habitat in high-value areas. 9, coordinate planning among and within agencies and jurisdictions to make sure that activities are aligned towards common outcomes and goals. And 10, build multi-benefit green infrastructure. And one news item for that, PSRC has applied for a near-term action grant with the Puget Sound Partnership to accelerate the development of stormwater parks. We have some examples in the region already. The city of Arlington has a stormwater park, as does Kitsap County, their Manchester Stormwater Park, so stay tuned for that. I'm going to pass it back to Erica.
Great. So now that the plan is finalized, we're publicizing it and would love your help if you could share it with your jurisdictions, and we're happy to share the data, so please have them contact us if you're interested. We are working on some of these actions that Maria mentioned with all of our partners, and there are a few key tools that we thought seem most promising in conserving and accelerating open space. I won't go through all of them, but I'll throw out one of them, hazard mitigation plans, as an opportunity, because FEMA is one of the few federal agencies that has increasing funding, and if you do get these projects that have multiple benefits, but if it's open space that provides hazard mitigation, if it's in their hazard mitigation plan, they can apply for FEMA grants. So a good source of funding. And of course, we'd like to incorporate this into Vision 2050, and I'll get to that in a second. But first, I wanted to let you know about a new group that's supporting open space in the region. They're called the Emerald Alliance for People, Nature, and Community. They're multi-sectoral, so they have folks from business and as well as government and education. And so that's in nonprofits, sorry. And so they're really going to, I hope, help us with this work that we're trying to do together. And they did receive a grant. The same grantor gave them some money to work on a funding strategy. So stay tuned for that. For Vision 2050, we're hoping to incorporate some of this information from the plan into both the narrative, but also think about how we can refine the multi-county planning policies, as well as identify some actions that can help support local planning for open space and acquisition. So those are some general ways that it can support it. And we do have a number of topic areas that we've identified in the plan, but generally they fall into these three categories: protecting and restoring open space, increasing access to parks, trails, and open space, and improving water quality. So I have the link there on the bottom. Please share it. If there are any questions, we're happy to answer those. But I'd love also to hear from you about how we can support you in your open space conservation efforts and ideas to get the word out, as well as ideas for Vision 2050.
Thank you. Got a question as we move forward. Are we the keeper of the plan? Is PSRC the keeper of the plan? And as counties, we'll be updating our comprehensive plan in 2024, I think. Is the intent that assistance or ideas and working with staff to try to blend these things into local comprehensive plan, is that going to reside here?
Okay, yeah. So we can provide technical support for doing that. We do, Vision 2050 will provide that opportunity to, continue to support that idea. So, but yeah, I think if we'd like to continue to update the plan, we might need to look for another grant, but so they'll definitely try to keep that going.
Here's one of the things, first of all, great overview, and Maria, we're so happy to be able to have you on our team to do this excellent work. One of the things I don't think we got really deep into, but you'll notice this if you take a look at this web link to the full plan, is the incredible data and mapping that was part of this. So this was the first time we had a roll-up for the entire region of all the things that your cities and counties are working on at the local level. The first time. So that's, Executive Summers, I think the big benefit is we're not trying to create a new layer. We're simply taking all the important work that all of our jurisdictions are doing in the region, and we're putting in one place so you can see the regional context of all this incredible work. That's where it's really helpful. So I think moving forward, having a refresh of that data in some period of time probably makes sense. But I just want to put an exclamation point on the fact that this is all the work that your communities are already doing, but now I think this document can help you all get focused on the priorities that you've already set for your communities, as well as hopefully help you compete for the resources to be able to move forward with these projects that you've prioritized. But the data and the analysis is fantastic, and I know we had this happen at the staff level where the mapping and all the data, you can really get in the weeds and see some pretty remarkable things that help provide great context for the region.
Christy.
Just a quick question. Your canopy coverage map, is that something we can contact you for? Is it fairly granular nature, or is it on that website?
Sure. I actually got that from the National Land Cover data set that's produced by the USGS, but we have the data set kind of clipped to our region available, and it's fairly granular, but it's also from 2011. That would be the one downside.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you. Maybe I missed it. Is there a definition for, I'm thinking urban open space in particular, is there a definition for what constitutes the the size of that? Your previous slide there, Erica, had a very attractive-looking, what I would call some open space in terms of how they had done some development around in urban environment. In many of our already urban communities, is there a hope to add to our open space quotient by doing this kind of thing, or does it have to be a certain minimum size to kind of qualify for this?
Well, these are mostly parks and designated open spaces, so sometimes they're less developed parks, and that's actually the Burke-Gilman Trail, so a regional trail. So they don't have to be a specific size. If they were actually on local planning maps, then they were included. And sometimes it's very appropriate to do a pocket park. And what we're really focusing on, and this was really only a starting point, is where do we not have access for people? And so that's kind of the first top priority, but we know that there are all sorts of other needs for each jurisdiction, including maintenance. That's a big deal. So we don't tell folks how to view their parks, but we have been hearing from different groups like the Trust for Public Land, but that cultural context is really important. So as folks want to, redevelop their parks, hopefully partners like that can help with that work if that's desired.
Yeah, my thought is when you talk about open space, we typically think of big open spaces that exist, and then how do we maintain them or keep them in open category. But I think there's opportunities as we go back and redevelop things to say, okay, this is not a huge open space, but it's better to think about some open space to go with this redevelopment as opposed to it's only that peat bog that's 8 acres. Let's preserve that. Let's not worry about, let's do that, but let's also think about how do we get this little half-acre pocket park
Absolutely.
When we put in the office building.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Any other comments, questions? Oh, excellent work, thank you, and very interesting, and also blending this with work of the Puget Sound Partnership and others. It's a good piece of work, and I know we'll be looking at how to incorporate the data into our plans. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that's the end of our agenda. Just please note there is no meeting in August. I feel the disappointment across the room. For you on the phone, there was just audible disappointment. Yes, you could feel it. Thank you. So our next meeting is Thursday, September 27th, and right here. And is there anything else for the good of the order? Just thank you all for being here, both in person and on the phone. Oh, yes, please. Sorry.
I would like to ask for a moment of personal privilege.
Yes.
Many of you are aware of the tragedy that happened in Kent over the weekend. We lost an officer in the line of duty. It has been extremely difficult, but I want to say thank you to every agency in this region. The outpouring of support and resources and love has been overwhelming. We wouldn't be able to get through this without you. I don't know if you saw in the news last night, the procession to bring Officer Moreno home yesterday was something that I have never seen or experienced in my life. Hope to never honestly have to go through that again, but we could not have done it without all of you. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay. Well, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.